Hi, I'm Zacharias. I'm the Senior Curator of Education and History at the Museum of Arts and Sciences in Daytona Beach, and I'm in New Smyrna Beach at the old sugar mill ruins. This was once a 600-acre plantation. It was high-tech. It was a steam-powered sugar mill built in 1830 by Henry Cruger and William-dePeyster. After the destruction in 1835 by the Seminoles, the ruins faced decades of rugged weather, hurricanes, destructive vegetation, and locals carrying off stones for their own personal purposes. And also ill-advised masonry repairs also damaged the ruins. Although there are thick forests behind me, this would have been completely cleared for the planting of sugarcane. This sugar plantation was operated by slaves. It didn't last very long, only 5 years, from 1830 to 1835. Not long after its destruction, the ruins became a curiosity for locals, painters, photographers, historians, and travel writers. I'm really excited today because we have with us a master landscape painter, Arnold Desmarais. He specializes in oil paintings and other media. He's going to do a pen and ink sketch for us and show us his techniques.
Hi, I'm Arnold Desmarais, and I'm an oil painter, but many times when I start a painting, I do studies. I do them in pencil, I do them in ink, and I taught myself how to do pen and ink drawings on a trip to Europe so that I could capture a lot of the detail which I incorporate into my oil paintings. Here we are so lucky in Florida in this area because we have so many wonderful ruins. And during the grand tours, many years and years ago, people used to travel to Europe. And one of the things that they did was to learn how to do watercolor and pen and ink drawings as well as pencil on location in these incredible ruins all over Europe and in the Far East. Today what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick pen and ink drawing and of this particular sugar mill plantation. And I've picked a location out which I think is indicative or representative of the mill. Anybody can do drawings on location. You do not have to be a fine artist to do this. You can work with the simplest of materials, and what I have is a simple dollar clipboard. I have a simple piece of paper, and it's very difficult to see. What I do is I make an imaginary mat. I have a right angle, and then I have two pens. I have a pen and actually a mechanical pencil. And that's all I work with on location. So you can pack this in a suitcase and take it with you.
The arched windows and rough-cut stone gave the appearance of a much older structure. Early historians in the area believed it to be an old Spanish mission church, but archaeological excavations disproved this as no artifacts were found associated with the Spanish mission.
What I'm doing is a very light pencil sketch. And why I like a mechanical pencil is because it is such a fine point to work with. What I'm doing is a ghost drawing of what I'm going to do in pen and ink. And I do this primarily to get the perspective correct with the building and to get the major details. This is the sugar mill plantation, so I felt that this was the perfect scene to do because of the pots in which they boiled the sugarcane and a very good part of the building. I also particularly liked the way this window, you can see this curve with the curve. It also added a little bit of the foliage of the palm trees, which indicates it's in a southern climate. What I've done is a very light pencil drawing. It's an HB lead. And now I'm going to switch over to these wonderful little pens, which they have in any department store or any art store. They come in every different thickness so that you can work in many different sizes. What I do is I work when I'm doing them on location, is I work with very fine points. And then if I choose to go back to my studio and finish the drawing, I can add thicker lines or more detail. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to switch to working with the pen over the ghost or the pencil drawing.
William Kimball contracted with Cruger and DePeyster to build the steam-operated sugar mill and sawmill using machinery made by Kimball's West Point foundry in Cold Springs, New York. Hundreds of African slaves were brought in to work the sugarcane fields. Some worked at the steam-powered processing factory, cooking the cane into molasses. The final product was put into hogshead barrels ready for shipment. Let's check in on Arnold and see how he's making progress on his sketch.
What I'm doing now is laying in the most important parts, the items that I think are really important to the sketch. And what I'm doing is I'm adding the very straight vertical and horizontal lines and the sense of depth with perspective. Now what you have to do is, as you're working pen and ink, and there's sort of like a practice that you learn when you're doing pen and ink, is to not add too much detail. And as you can see, I'm working in sort of a sketch format. I'm not drawing straight lines with a ruler. All I'm doing is sketching in all of this wonderful detail, but I'm spreading it all over the painting simultaneously because of the fact that I will choose which items I really want the viewer to focus on afterwards. What I want to do is get all the elements in first, and then I'm going to decide where I want the viewer to look by adding in all the detail. And now I'm drawing right to the edge of that matted line. And what that does is it makes, like a watercolor, an imaginary mat on the painting. So it's actually like a finished piece when you get done, ready to frame. Now again, the sugar mill plantation is where we are at. So I feel that the actual pots and this part of the building are the most important. So this is why I'm really focusing on this general pot. I'm also just adding in the shapes. I want to get the painting to be an overall finished piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm just adding details where I think the trees need to be at this point. I think people make the mistake of adding too much detail at this point. They think they need to draw the whole picture, and they don't. Because what you're doing is just a representation of it. Then you're going to add in all the detailing with all the dark lines and the shadowing, which I do by cross-hatching. Cross-hatching is a process. There are many, many ways of doing that. But what I'm going to do is I'm just giving myself the ability to trace through, and I'm going to add in the lines so that we know where the building actually stands. So it feels like it has volume. And as you can see, the perspective, these lines are going to get narrower as they go down because they're going away from you.
This 1830 sugar mill was built of a local stone called coquina. Now the Spanish used it early on. They never called it coquina, they just called it stone. It is a sedimentary rock. It's found in tropical and subtropical waters. When they quarry it, they have to leave it out to dry for 1 to 3 years in order for them to use it as a building material. The sugar or molasses that was produced here by the slaves working these huge kettle pots would have been sent out in hogshead barrels to Mosquito Inlet, or what we call Ponce Inlet today, would have been put on schooners and then shipped to markets further north, probably like Savannah, Charleston, and Virginia. What happened to the Cruger-dePeyster Sugar Mill operation? The Second Seminole War broke out, and in December of 1835, a Seminole war party descended upon the plantation and destroyed it. You can still see the burn marks on the factory here, which is pretty remarkable. The Seminoles went on to burn all the plantations all up and down the Halifax River and throughout all of northeast Florida, burning some 24 different plantations roughly.
Now with pen and ink, how you capture the volume of an item is by the shadows. For all that matters, that's what you do with pencil sketching and painting as well. What I've done is I've done what they call cross-hatching, and that's how I created the shadows on those pots right there. And what I'm going to do is I've developed the first one on the right, Now the middle one, I'm going to start developing that shadow with cross-hatching. And you really don't have to worry if you go over the lines slightly. That actually adds a little bit of blurriness to it, and it adds more dimension. So what I'm doing is I'm adding cross-hatching, and there are many, many other methods of creating shadows and senses of depth. And this is only one of very many. Now the darkest shadow is right under the lip. And so what you do is you do your lines in a different direction. And what you're doing is just a series of very, very, very tiny lines. And by doing them in different directions, it makes it darker and darker. It's also nice if you can draw the ink out, in other words, in this format, like this, so that the edge of the line is not a sharp, blunt line. So you can see the shadow starting to develop on the second pot, very much like this one. And that's the light on the side of the pot, which I'm going to start now on the third one. And where the third one is further away, I want the lines to be a little bit more spread out so it won't be quite as dark. So what I'm doing now is I'm darkening the top edge of the building, and I'm adding a little bit more detail. And what you have to do is learn to really basically just scribble. And you have to practice this, because what you do is the more scribbling you add, the darker it's going to become. I'm assuming that this is from the deterioration and the fire in this building, that the top of the building is black like this. And I just want to capture that moment because I think it's important to it being the ruin that it is. And so what I'm doing is I'm just adding these little tiny scribble lines which indicate the burnt part of the top of the building. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start building the palm tree. Now I'm only going to do the bottom part of the palm tree because of the fact that I don't want the focus to be at the top of the picture, way up here at the mat line or the matting line. And so what I'm doing is I'm just adding cross-hatching up here. And what you do is you just get the overall feeling of the palm tree. You're not trying to do any one particular branch. All you're going to do is suggest that the fronds of the palm tree are soft and they're laying there. Now what I'm going to do after this is I'm going to add the tops of these trees way in the distance. And again, these are very small scribble lines, which when they're done, believe it or not, will suggest to the viewer that they are trees in the background. And I'm going to show you other pictures that have this use. And what you do is you're just suggesting that these lines are there. Usually these are done many times in architectural drawings, and what it does, it just suggests the background that's in back of the tree, that's in the back of this particular ruin. I'm going to continue to develop the palm tree, and I don't want to overdevelop it. And the other thing I definitely want to add is I want to add some Spanish moss, because that is so indicative of Florida and this climate. So again, I'm not going to do any finished drawing. I'm just going to add the slightest suggestion of Spanish moss.
After the destruction of the plantation, all salvageable equipment, including the cane crusher, were sent to the Dunlawton plantation. That's today's Dunlawton Sugar Mill Gardens in Port Orange.
This is a finished drawing, which I did last evening in my studio of this particular site. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to capture all the information so that I can eventually put this into an oil painting. What I do is I figure out what is the most important part of the image that I want to create. And I did it on black and white so that it's very clear to me. But in many times I do it on colored paper as well. Now what I want to do is I want to show you a book. I am self-taught in pen and ink, and this is the book that I learned everything from. I think it's an amazing book. I think you could still get it online. It's a soft cover book, very reasonable. And there are many, many techniques that you can use in doing a pen and ink that you can take from this book and apply to your own work. These are the incredible techniques that you can learn from this particular book on how to do foliage, how to do architecture, and you can take these and apply them to any location. I particularly like doing the ruins because these are places that I can take home and put into our photo album. We photograph the images and then we add them to our photo albums, which are my artwork in these particular countries.
It has a certain historical romance, this place. The collapsed walls, the stone rubble, the odd architectural features all lend itself to the feeling and the belief that this is a very ancient place, but it's not. But when you do come here, you do get the sense that some important historical event happened here. If you're in the new Smyrna Beach area, this is a great place to come by and see. If you've never been here before, it's really kind of awe-inspiring, and you really feel the history when you're out here. If you want to see part of Florida's turbulent frontier history, this is a great place to visit. It's a reminder of how we can learn from our history and not repeat prior mistakes. It's been a great day, and I'd like to thank artist Arnold Desmarais for sharing his in-depth knowledge.